One night, during a late training exercise, things went too far. The drill was supposed to simulate a capture scenario, recruits practicing how to resist interrogation. It was meant to push limits, but not cross them. Yet for Rachel, it turned into a nightmare. A group of men cornered her. They taunted, shoved, and when she refused to break, one of them snapped. His boot struck her head with brutal force. But before that moment, there was a remote training ground where the sun burned against the desert horizon and dust never seemed to settle. Rows of young recruits drilled endlessly, sweat soaking their uniforms, boots pounding into dirt. Among them was Lieutenant Rachel Mitchell. She was not the loudest. She was not the fastest, but there was something about her that stood out. A calm determination that others could not quite understand. Rachel had grown up in a small coastal town where people lived simple lives. Her father, a physician, wanted her to stay safe to carry on his practice. Her mother, an educator, hoped Rachel would choose a classroom over a battlefield. But Rachel had dreams of her own. She wanted to serve, to carry a rifle, to stand shoulder to shoulder with others who believed in something bigger than themselves. Her decision was not easy. She faced criticism, doubt, and the heavy silence of those who thought she would not last. But she pressed forward. Inside the barracks, though, reality was harsher than the dream. Rachel faced constant whispers. Some of the men mocked her during training, laughing when she stumbled, calling her dead weight. Others accused her of being there only because of favoritism, though they did not know the truth. The pressure built day after day, but Rachel never responded. She endured quietly, patiently, waiting for her chance to prove herself. One night, during a late training exercise, things went too far. The drill was supposed to simulate a capture scenario, recruits practicing how to resist interrogation. It was meant to push limits, but not cross them. Yet for Rachel, it turned into a nightmare. A group of men cornered her. They taunted, shoved, and when she refused to break, one of them snapped. His boot struck her head with brutal force. Rachel collapsed, the world spinning around her. Blood trickled from her forehead, the taste of iron sharp in her mouth. Her ears rang, her vision blurred. For a moment, she thought she might never rise again. But deep inside, something stronger than pain pushed her up. She steadied herself on shaking legs, wiped the blood from her face, and walked away without a word. The barracks fell silent, but no one followed her. Rachel walked straight to the command tent. Those who saw her pass were stunned by the sight of her swollen face, her uniform stained. She disappeared inside, and moments later, the base erupted into chaos. Headlights cut through the night as a convoy of 3 black SUVs roared into the compound. Doors slammed, and out stepped 3 generals. Their presence was enough to stop every soldier in his tracks. Generals did not just appear in the middle of the night. Not without reason. Whispers spread like wildfire. What is happening? Why are they here? Who called them? The answer soon became clear. Rachel was not just another recruit. For years, she had kept quiet about her connection to the highest ranks. One of those generals had promised her late parents, his closest friends, that he would watch over her if she ever chose the uniform. And when Rachel entered his tent, bleeding but unbroken, she did not ask for revenge. She asked for accountability. The generals stormed into the barracks. Soldiers snapped to attention, fear written across their faces. The men responsible for the attack stood pale, their eyes darting, knowing their time was up. One general's voice cut through the silence. Who laid hands on her? Silence. Not one dared speak. But Rachel, standing behind them, refused to single out names. Her words carried more weight than any accusation. It was not just one man. It is the culture you have allowed here. Fix it or more of us will fall. The generals looked at one another. Her statement was a knife to the heart of their leadership. She was not asking for punishment. She was demanding change. That very night, the entire unit was shut down. Investigations launched. Careers ended. The men who had targeted her would never again wear the uniform. The toxic environment they had built was dismantled piece by piece. But Rachel's story did not end there. She was transferred to another base where whispers followed her. Some called her the one who shut down a unit. Others saw her as a quiet symbol of courage. She trained harder than ever, carrying herself with even more strength, not to prove herself to others, but to honor the sacrifice of those who had come before her. Months later, at a formal ceremony attended by high-ranking officers, Rachel's resilience was recognized. She walked across a stage, still humble, still quiet, as one of the generals pinned a medal to her chest. The applause was thunderous, but Rachel did not smile for herself.
Later, she placed that medal in a memorial wall filled with names of fallen soldiers. When asked why she gave away such an honor, her answer was simple. It was never about me. It was about all of us who serve, believing in something greater. Respect, honor, dignity. That is what I fight for. Over time, Rachel rose in rank. She began leading troops of her own. She made sure her units were different, built on trust, not intimidation. She pushed her soldiers to their limits, but she also protected their dignity. Those under her command respected her, not out of fear, but because she embodied the values they all swore to uphold. Her story spread across bases, whispered from one barracks to another.
Not because she was famous, but because she had faced humiliation, violence, and injustice, and she stood anyway. She had forced generals to act, and in doing so became a symbol of quiet strength. Years later, recruits would look at her and see not just a leader, but a reminder. Strength is not in the punch you throw, but in the stand you take when everything tries to knock you down. Rachel Mitchell never asked for glory. She never sought the spotlight, but history remembered her as the soldier who changed the system, not by fighting with fists, but by refusing to bow her head when the world tried to break her. This story reminds us all, courage does not always shout. Sometimes it walks into a command tent, bloodied but unbroken, and demands justice with a steady voice. If this story touched you, remember to share it with others who need to hear that dignity can never be stolen, only surrendered. The institutional reforms Rachel forced extended far beyond her original unit. Training protocols were revised across the entire service. Oversight mechanisms were strengthened at every level. Anonymous reporting systems were established to protect future victims. The culture of permissive hazing was confronted at the highest levels of command. Other bases took notice of what had happened. Other commanders reevaluated their own environments, asking hard questions about what they had allowed to fester. The ripple effects of one recruit's moral courage transformed how the entire service approached dignity and accountability. Rachel became living proof that the system, however flawed, could be forced to correct itself when confronted with undeniable moral clarity. The generals who shut down her unit became advocates for reform, carrying the lessons forward to every installation under their command. The changes were not just procedural, they were cultural. Training instructors received new guidance on maintaining discipline without degradation. Leadership courses incorporated case studies of toxic environments and how to dismantle them. Zero-tolerance policies replaced the old permissive attitudes that had allowed harassment to thrive. Rachel's name was never mentioned in official documentation, her privacy protected by the same generals who had intervened on her behalf. But those who knew, those who had witnessed the transformation, understood exactly whose courage had sparked the change. In her new unit, Rachel quietly demonstrated a different model of leadership. She was demanding but fair, pushing her soldiers to excellence without destroying their dignity. When mistakes happened, she corrected them without humiliation. When conflicts arose, she addressed them directly rather than allowing them to poison the environment. Her troops noticed the difference. They saw a leader who believed in them, who challenged them to be better without tearing them down. The respect she earned was genuine, built on trust rather than fear. Word spread through informal channels. Young officers sought assignments under her command, wanting to learn her approach. Senior leaders observed her methods, recognizing their effectiveness. The memorial wall, where Rachel had placed her medal, became a site of quiet pilgrimage. Other soldiers who had suffered in silence found courage in her example. Some came forward with their own stories of harassment and abuse, stories they had buried for years. The reporting systems Rachel's case had created gave them pathways to accountability that had not existed before. Each case was investigated thoroughly. Each perpetrator faced consequences. The message was clear: the old culture would not be tolerated any longer. Rachel herself continued to serve with the same quiet determination that had defined her from the beginning. She never spoke publicly about what had happened to her. She never gave interviews or sought recognition. When reporters tried to contact her, she declined politely but firmly. Her focus remained on her troops, on leading them well, on building units where everyone could serve with dignity. Years passed, and Rachel's rank continued to rise. Captain, Major, Lieutenant Colonel. Each promotion brought new responsibilities, larger commands, broader influence. But her approach never changed. She remained the leader who protected dignity while demanding excellence, who built trust while maintaining discipline. The soldiers who served under her carried her lessons forward to their own commands. The three generals who had arrived that night never forgot what they had witnessed. They had seen a young soldier, bloodied and traumatized, refuse the easy path of personal vengeance and instead demand systemic change. That moral courage, that clarity of purpose, had shaken them deeply. They recognized that Rachel had held a mirror up to their own leadership, forcing them to confront failures they had been too comfortable to acknowledge. One of those generals, the family friend who had promised Rachel's parents he would watch over her, later testified before Congress about military culture reform. He never mentioned Rachel by name, but his passion for the subject was clearly personal. His testimony helped secure funding for expanded oversight programs and stronger protections for service members reporting abuse. The other two generals implemented similar reforms in their own commands, creating environments where dignity was as important as discipline. They became known as reformers, leaders who understood that true military strength came not from breaking people down, but from building them up. Rachel's influence extended beyond those who knew her story directly. Training manuals were rewritten. Academy curricula were updated. New officers learned different models of leadership. The toxic culture that had nearly destroyed Rachel became a cautionary tale taught at every level of military education. Instructors used carefully anonymized versions of the incident to illustrate how permissive leadership creates dangerous environments. They taught future officers to recognize the warning signs, to intervene before situations escalated, to build cultures of accountability from the beginning. Rachel's approach to leadership became a model studied and emulated. Her ability to maintain high standards while protecting dignity, to demand excellence without degradation, represented a balance many leaders struggled to achieve. Videos of her training methods were shared in professional development courses. Her techniques for addressing conflicts directly and constructively were incorporated into leadership doctrine. Some of the men who had been part of that original toxic unit faced their own reckonings. A few found redemption through genuine change, acknowledging what they had participated in and working to become better. Others remained bitter, unable to accept responsibility for their actions. But none of them wore the uniform again. The lives they had imagined, the careers they had expected, ended that night when the generals arrived. Rachel occasionally thought about them, wondering if any had truly understood the lesson. She hoped they had, but she knew some wounds never fully heal, some lessons never fully land. What mattered more was that future generations would not have to endure what she had endured. The systems were stronger now. The culture was changing. The silence that had protected abusers was breaking. Rachel's legacy was not just in policy changes or reformed procedures. It was in the thousands of soldiers who served in healthier environments because she had refused to accept the status quo. It was in the victims who found courage to report abuse because reporting systems now existed. It was in the leaders who built trust instead of fear because they had learned a different way. On the 20th anniversary of that night, a ceremony was held at the memorial wall. Rachel attended quietly, standing in the back as speakers discussed the reforms that had transformed military culture. They did not mention her name, respecting her wishes for privacy. But when the ceremony ended, dozens of soldiers approached her. Some were young recruits who had heard whispered versions of her story. Others were senior officers who had served under her command. They thanked her, not with grand speeches, but with simple words of gratitude. You showed us a better way. You gave us courage to stand up. You made us believe dignity matters as much as discipline. Rachel listened to their words, feeling the weight of years and choices. She had never wanted to be a symbol, had never sought this role. But she had accepted it because the alternative was allowing the cycle to continue. She had stood up not because she was fearless, but because someone had to, and in standing, she had shown others they could stand too. As the sun set behind the memorial wall, Rachel placed her hand on the cold stone where names were carved. She thought about all the soldiers who had not survived, who had not been protected, who had not found justice. She thought about the ones who would come after, who would serve in a better system because hard choices had been made. This story reminds us all that courage does not always shout. Sometimes it walks into a command tent, bloodied but unbroken, and demands justice with a steady voice. Strength is not in the punch you throw, but in the stand you take when everything tries to knock you down. Rachel Mitchell never asked for glory. She never sought the spotlight. But history remembered her as the soldier who changed the system, not by fighting with fists, but by refusing to bow her head when the world tried to break her.